From the corner of his eye Jahan saw his master's face go white. He picked out a smell in the air, or rather a mixture of smells, perhaps juniper and birch twigs, with a sharp undertone, possibly burned elms. Whether it was coming from the sovereign or from Sinan, he did not have a chance to find out. Panicking, he bowed again, his forehead touching the floor. He heard the Sultan heave a sigh, as if searching for something else to say. But he said nothing. Instead he came closer, closer, his frame blocking the candlelight. Jahan shivered under the sovereign's gaze. His heart skipped a beat. Had the Sultan suspected that he had trespassed into the inner courtyard tonight? Jahan felt his royal eyes running over him for another moment, no more, after which he strode off, his viziers and guards at his heels. And this is how, in the month of December, an early day in Ramadan, in the year 1574, Sinan, in his capacity as chief royal architect, and his apprentice Jahan, who had no place at this meeting and yet was present, were given the task of constructing inside the gardens of the Hagia Sophia a monument that was large and impressive enough to befit 5 princes, the brothers of Sultan Murad, but neither so large nor so impressive as to remind anyone of how they had been strangled, on his orders, on the night he ascended the throne. What none of those present could foresee was that years later, when Sultan Murad died, on another night like this, as the wind moaned and the animals in the menagerie cried, his own sons, all 19 of them, would be strangled with a silken bowstring, so as not to spill their noble blood, and, by a twist of fate, buried in the same place that was built by the architect and the apprentice. Before the master the prophet Jacob had 12 sons, the prophet Jesus 12 apostles. Prophet Joseph, whose story is told in the 12th surah of the Quran, was his father's favorite child. 12 loaves of bread the Jews placed at their tables. 12 golden lions guarded the throne of Solomon. There were 6 steps up to the throne, and, since every climb had a descent, that meant 6 steps down, 12 in total. 12 cardinal beliefs wafted through the land of Hindustan. 12 imams succeeded the Prophet Muhammad in the Shia creed. 12 stars ornamented Mary's crown. And a boy named Jahan had barely completed 12 years of his life when he saw Istanbul for the very first time. Skinny, sunburned and restless as a fish in midstream, he was rather short for his age. As if to make up for his height, a thatch of black hair grew upwards and perched on his head like a creature with a life of its own. His hair was the first thing people saw when they looked at him. Next came his ears, each the size of a thug's fist. But his mother said that someday girls would be charmed by his dazzling smile and by the single dimple in his left cheek, a cook's fingerprint on soft dough. This she had said, this he believed. Lips red as a rosebud, hair lustrous as silk, waist thinner than a willow branch. Nimble as a gazelle, strong as an ox, blessed with the voice of a nightingale, which she would use to sing lullabies to her babies, not for idle chatter, and never to defy her husband. Such was the bride his mother would have wanted for him had she been alive. But she was gone. The vapors, the physician had said, though Jahan knew it was the beating she received every day from his brood of a stepfather, who also happened to be his uncle. The man had cried his heart out at the funeral, as if it was someone else who had caused her early death. Jahan had hated him with all his being ever since. When he had boarded this vessel, he regretted leaving home without having taken his revenge. Yet he knew if he had stayed either he would have killed his uncle or his uncle would have killed him. Since he was still too young, and not strong enough, it would have probably been the latter. When the right time arrived, Jahan would return for retribution. And he would find his beloved. They would marry in a ceremony of 40 days and 40 nights, stuffing themselves with sweetmeats and laughter. Their first daughter he would name after his mother. It was a dream he told no one. As the caravel approached the port, the boy began to see birds in greater numbers. And a greater variety. Seagulls, sandpipers, curlews, sparrows, jays and magpies, one of them carrying a shiny god in its beak. A few, the brave or the foolish, alighted on the sails, too close to the humans. The air carried a new odor underneath, foreign and foul. After weeks of sailing in the open sea, Catching sight of the city had a strange effect on Jahan's imagination, especially on a misty day such as this. He peered ahead at the line where the water lapped against the shore, a strip of grey, and could not make out whether he was sailing towards Istanbul or away from it. The longer he stared, the more the land seemed like an extension of the sea, a molten town perched on the tip of the waves, swaying, dizzying, ever-changing. This, more or less, was his earliest impression of Istanbul, and unbeknown to him, it would not change even after a lifetime. Slowly, the boy walked across the deck. The sailors were too busy to mind him being under their feet. He reached the end of the bow, where he had never been before. Ignoring the wind on his face, he squinted into the heart of Istanbul, which he couldn't quite see, not yet. Then, little by little, the mist dissolved, as though someone had pulled back a curtain. The city, now clearly defined, opened up before him, burning bright. Light and shadows, crests and slopes, up and down through hill after hill, covered here and there with groves of cypress, she seemed like a wen of opposites. Denying herself at every step, changing disposition in each quarter, caring and callous at once, Istanbul gave generously and, with the same breath, recalled her gift. A city so vast she expanded left and right, and up towards the firmament, striving to ascend, desiring more, never satisfied. Yet enchanting she was. Though he was a stranger to her ways, the boy sensed how one could fall under her spell. Jahan hurried to the hold. The elephant was in a crate, turgid and listless. "You've made it. Look, you are here." This last word he uttered with a slight quaver, since he didn't know what kind of a place here was. It didn't matter. Whatever awaited the animal in this new kingdom couldn't be worse than the voyage he had just endured. Chota was sitting on his haunches, looking so still that for a moment the boy feared his heart had stopped beating. Detecting the animal's soft, ragged breathing upon approaching him, Jahan felt a small relief. The glimmer, however, had gone from the beast's eyes, the luster from his skin. The day before he had not eaten, not slept. There was a scary lump behind his jaws and his trunk was visibly swollen. The boy splashed water on his head, uneasy about yet again using seawater, which left salty marks all over his skin that must have prickled. "When we get to the palace, I'll wash you with sweet waters," Jahan promised. Gently, carefully, he applied turmeric to the elephant's swellings. The animal had lost weight. The last stages of the journey had been particularly tough for him. "You'll see. The Sultana will dote on you. You'll be the darling of concubines," Jahan said. Then, as another possibility came to mind, he added, "If it turns out they're not kind, you can run away. I'll come with you too." He would have gone on longer in this vein, but he heard footsteps on the stairs. A sailor dashed in, bellowed, "Oi, the captain wants to see you." Now, a moment later the boy was in front of the captain's door, listening to the sound of hacking and spitting coming from inside. He was scared of the man, though he tried not to show it. Captain Gareth was known to all and sundry as Gavor * Garrett or Delabash Reese, Captain Crazyhead. One moment he could be joking and laughing with some sailor, and the next pulling out his sword to butcher him into 1,000 pieces. Jahan had seen it happen. Born in a coastal town in England, this sea dog, who loved nothing more than a slab of slow-roasted pork belly and a draught of ale, had, for a reason no one quite understood, betrayed his countrymen and joined the Ottoman naval force with precious secrets under his hat. His fearlessness had made him dear to the palace and earned him a fleet of his own. It had amused Sultan Suleiman no end that he attacked and plundered Christian ships with a ferocity no Ottoman seafarer had ever displayed. The Sultan granted him protection but did not trust him. He knew that a man who stabbed his own companions in the back would never be a true friend to anyone else. The creature who arrived at your door, having bitten the hand that fed him all along, would not hesitate to sink his teeth into your flesh once he was inside. When the boy entered the room, he found the captain sitting at his desk, looking less scraggly than usual. His beard, washed, combed and anointed, was not the dark chestnut that it had been for weeks on end, but a lighter brown, almost tawny. A scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his lips, making his mouth seem like a continuation of the wound. Having cast off his everyday umber shirt, he was clad in a loose, pale shirt and a camel shalwar. A string of turquoise beads against the evil eye was around his neck. On the table beside him were a candle burned to a stub and a ledger where he noted down the booty captured along the way. The boy noticed him covering the page, although there was no need. Jahan could not read. Letters were not his friends, but shapes and pictures were. Mud, clay, goatskin, calfskin, on whatever surface he could he drew. Throughout the voyage he had made endless sketches of the sailors and the ship. See, I'm a man of my word. I brought you here in one piece, Captain Gareth said and spat with force. The elephant is sick, the boy said, eyeing the bowl where the phlegm had landed. You didn't allow me to take him out of his crate. When he tramples solid ground he'll mend in no time. The captain's tone grew condescending. What is it to you anyway? It's not your beast. Nay, it's the Sultan's. That's right, lad. If you do as I say we'll all benefit from it. Jahan lowered his gaze. The man had mentioned this matter before, but Jahan had hoped he would forget about it. Apparently, he hadn't. The palace is full of gold and gems. A thief's paradise, said Captain Gareth. When you get there you're going to steal for me. Don't try to ransack the place. The Turks will chop your hands off. You'll do it slowly, bit by bit. But there are guards everywhere. I cannot. Swift as a thought the captain pounced on the boy. Are you saying you won't do it? You've forgotten what happened to that miserable mahout, eh? I have not, said Jahan, his face ashen. Remember, you could have met the same end. If it wasn't for me, lad like you would never have survived. I'm obliged, said the boy quietly. Show your gratitude with jewels, not empty words. He coughed, spittle dribbling from his lip. He pulled the boy closer. The mates would have chopped up the elephant and fed him to the sharks. And you? They'd have mounted you, all of 'em. When they tired of your pretty ass, they'd have sold you to a bawdy house. You owe me, little scamp. You're going to the palace straight away. You'll pretend you're the beast's tamer. What if they notice I don't know anything about elephants? Said Jahan. Then that means you've failed, said the captain, his breath sour. But you won't. A canny lad like you. I'll wait till you find your feet. I'll come and find you. If you go against me, I swear to God I'll have you gutted alive. I'll tell everyone you are an impostor. You know how they punish a man who lies to the Sultan. They lift him to the gibbet, higher and higher, and then, drop him down, on an iron hook. It takes 3 days to die. Imagine, 3 bloody days. You'd beg for someone to kill you. Jahan wriggled out of the man's grip. He bolted out of the cabin, sprinted across the deck and ran down into the hold, where he crawled in beside the elephant, who, though silent and sick, had become his only friend. There, he wept like the child that he was. Once the ship docked they waited for the freight to be unloaded. The boy listened to the flurry upstairs, and, although he longed for fresh air and was starving, he dared not move. He wondered where the rats had gone. Did rodents, like genteel passengers, disembark in file when a boat was in the quay? In his mind's eye he saw dozens of red-black tails scurrying in all directions, disappearing into the warren of streets and alleys that was Istanbul. Unable to wait any longer, he climbed to the deck, which, to his relief, was empty. As his eyes scoured the dock ahead he saw the captain talking to a man with an elegant robe and a high turban. A senior official, no doubt. When they noticed him the captain made a gesture for him to approach. Jahan crossed the rickety wooden plank, jumped down and walked towards them. The captain tells me you are the mahout, said the official. Jahan hesitated for the briefest moment, that passing doubt one feels before uttering a lie. Yes, Effendi, I came from Hindustan with the elephant. You did? A shadow of suspicion flickered across the man's face. How is it that you speak our language? Jahan was expecting this question. They taught me in the Shah's palace. I learned more on board. The captain helped me. Very well. We'll get the elephant out tomorrow afternoon, said the official. First we need to unload the freight. Aghast, Jahan threw himself on the ground. If you would be so good, Effendi. The beast is sick. He'll die should he stay in that hold another night. There was a surprised silence until the official said, You care for the animal. He's a good boy, the captain said, his eyes cold despite his smile. 5 sailors were assigned the task of getting the elephant out. Eyeing the animal with disdain, swearing a blue streak, they tied ropes around him and pulled with all their might. Chota didn't budge. The boy watched the men toil, his anxiety growing with each passing moment. After much deliberation, it was decided not to force the elephant out but to winch the crate up with him inside it. A brigade of haulers unlatched the covers of the hold, leaving it wide open, and tied hawsers to 4 sides of the crate, which they coiled around aged oak trees. When ready, the men towed in unison, their arms jerking in tandem, their cheeks puffed with exertion. With one last tug, a large plank came off, falling down with a crash, miraculously not hurting anyone. Bit by bit, the crate levitated, then stopped. Down below, people gaped in astonishment at the elephant, which they could see through the gaps in the crate. He was dangling in the air like some half-bird, half-bull creature, Dabbit al-Ard, the beast of the earth that the Imam said would appear on the Day of Judgment. Other men ran to help. The crowd of spectators thickened, and soon every person in the port was either watching or pulling. Jahan scampered back and forth, trying to lend a hand but not knowing quite how. When the crate landed it did so with a loud, sickening thud. The elephant's head hit the roof slats. The haulers did not want to bring him out for fear the beast would attack them. It took the boy a lot of pleading to assure them that Chota would not. Once out, Chota's legs gave way. He collapsed like a puppet without strings. Limp with exhaustion, he refused to move, shutting his eyes as if he wanted this place and these people to disappear. They pushed and yanked and hoisted and flogged him, ultimately managing to thrust him onto a mammoth cart pulled by a dozen horses. Just as Jahan was about to hop on, an arm clutched at his elbow. It was Captain Gareth. Farewell, son, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Then, dropping his voice to a whisper, he added, Go now, my little thief. Bring me diamonds and rubies. Remember, if you do me wrong, I'll cut off your balls. Trust me, Jahan mumbled. Words carried away by the wind as soon as they left his lips, and climbed onto the cart. In every street through which they passed, people moved aside in fright and delight. Women drew their babies close. Mendicants hid their begging bowls. Old men grabbed their canes as though in defense. Christians made the cross. Muslims recited suras to chase Shaitan away. Jews prayed benedictions. Europeans looked half amused, half awed. A big, brawny Kazakh went pale, as if he had just seen a specter. There was something so infantile in the man's fright that Jahan could not help but chuckle. Children, only they, stared up with sparkling eyes, pointing at the white beast. Jahan glimpsed partly hidden female faces behind latticed windows, ornamented birdhouses on the walls, domes that caught the last rays of sun and lots of trees, chestnut, linden, quince. Wherever he turned he saw seagulls and cats, the 2 animals that were given free rein. Perky and pert, the seagulls soared in circles, diving to peck at the bait in a fisherman's bucket, or the fried liver on a street vendor's tray, or the pie left to cool on a windowsill. Nobody seemed to mind. Even when they chased away the birds, they did so reluctantly, making a show of it. Jahan learned that the city had 24 gates and was composed of 3 towns, Istanbul, Galata and Scutari. He observed that people were attired in different colors, though according to what rule, he could not fathom. There were water carriers with dainty china cups and peddlers hawking everything from musk to dried mackerel. Here and there he spotted a tiny wooden shack where they sold drinks in earthenware cups. Sherbet, said the official, smacking his lips, but Jahan had no clue what it tasted like. As they drove along, the official pointed things out. This cove is Georgian, that one Armenian. The scrawny figure over there is a dervish, the one beside him a dragoman. This man, a wearer of green, is an imam, for only they can put on the color favored by the Prophet. See the baker around the corner, he is Greek. They make the best bread, those infidels, but don't you dare eat any, they draw the sign of the cross on every loaf. One bite and you'll turn into one of them. This shopowner is Jewish, he sells chickens but can't kill the birds himself and pays a rabbi to do that. That fellow with sheepskin over his shoulders and rings in his pierced ears is a Torlik, a holy soul, some say, a sluggard if you ask me. Look at those janissaries over there. They are not allowed to grow beards, only mustaches. The Muslims wore turbans. Jews had red hats, and Christians, black hats. Arabs, Kurds, Nestorians, Circassians, Kazakhs, Tatars, Albanians, Bulgarians, Greeks, Abkhaz, Pomaks. They walked separate paths while their shadows met and mingled in knots. There are 72.5 tribes, the official said, each has its place. As long as everyone knows their limits we live in peace. Who are the half? Jahan asked. Oh, the gypsies. No one trusts them. They are forbidden to ride horses, only donkeys. They are not allowed to breed but they multiply anyhow, they got no shame. Stay away from the whole cursed bunch of these stinking heathens. Nodding, Jahan decided to steer clear of anyone who looked like a gypsy. Gradually, the houses became sparse, the trees grew taller, and the din subsided. I ought to make the elephant ready before we present him to the Sultan, Jahan said eagerly. A gift from the Indian Shah must look handsome. The man raised an eyebrow. Don't you know, lad? Your Padishah is gone. What do you mean, Effendi? Al-Sultan al-Azam Humayun. While you were on that ship, he lost his throne. All he has left is a wife and a couple of servants, we heard. He's not a ruler anymore. Jahan pursed his lips. What would happen to the elephant now that the king who had sent him was king no more? He had no doubt that should Sultan Suleiman ship the animal back he would die on board. Perturbed, he said, Chota won't survive another voyage. Don't fret. They won't return him, said the official. We've all sorts of beasts in the palace, but never had a white elephant before. Do you think they'll like him? The Sultan won't be bothered. He's got important tasks. But the Sultana, the official lapsed into silence. A haunting look came over his face as he stared hard and long at something in the distance. When Jahan followed his gaze, he saw, looming high atop a promontory, the outline of a huge building, its torches twinkling in the dark and its gates closed like lips guarding secrets. Is this the palace? Jahan whispered. This is it, said the man proudly, as if the place belonged to his father. You are now in the abode of the Lord of East and West. Jahan's face lit up with expectation. Every chamber under its roof must abound with silks and brocades, he thought. Every hall must echo with joyous laughter. The Sultana's diamonds must be so large that each has a name prettier than that of a concubine. They reached the imperial gate, under the stern gaze of the guards, who showed no interest in Chota, as though they were used to seeing a white elephant every day. When the party arrived at the middle gate, which had conical towers on each side with flaming torches, they got down from the carriage. The wind shifted just then, carrying a putrid smell. It was in that instant that Jahan, on impulse, glanced up towards the shadows in the background. He froze as he caught sight of the gibbets. There were 3 of them. 1 short, 2 tall. Mounted on each was a severed head, silently rotting away, swollen, empurpled, the mouth stuffed with hay. The boy caught an almost imperceptible movement, the insatiable greed of maggots crawling inside human flesh. Traitors, said the official under his breath and spat with force. But what have they done wrong? Asked Jahan, his voice frail. Treachery, as likely as not. Either that or theft, I'd say. They had it coming, for sure. This is what happens to those who play false. Dazed, whey-faced, dwarfed by the columns ahead of him and suddenly bereft of words, Jahan trudged through the massive gate. Though he was gripped by an urgent desire to run away, he could not bring himself to leave the elephant. Like a convict trudging to the gallows, Surrendering to a fate he could neither avoid nor accept, he followed the official and entered Sultan Suleiman's palace. All the boy glimpsed that night, as on the ensuing nights, were mosques. Walls, a mammoth door with iron studs, a courtyard so vast it could have swallowed the world, and more walls. It occurred to him that you could live in a palace all your life but never see much of it. They were taken to a barn with an earthen floor, thatched roof and lofty ceiling, Chota's new home. Inside was a sullen, sinewy fellow of indeterminable age. He had magical fingers that healed animals, though they were of no use when it came to human diseases. His name was Taraz the Siberian. Although there were no horses in sight, they could hear them shuffling about and neighing nearby, made nervous by their presence. Since time immemorial horses had disliked elephants, Taraz said. It must have been an ill-founded equine fear, he added, since he had never heard of an elephant laying into a horse. Taraz examined Chota's mouth, eyes, trunk, excrement. He glared at Jahan, clearly blaming him for the animal's condition. The boy felt small, ashamed. They had been on the same ship, but Chota was on the brink of collapse while he was healthy as the crescent above. Deftly, gingerly, the healer applied some foul-smelling ointment to Chota's lumps, and wrapped his trunk with burlap full of crushed leaves and a fragrant resin that Jahan later on learned was called myrrh. Not knowing how to help, the boy brought a bucket of fresh water, which he placed next to the piles of shrubs, apples, cabbages and hay, a banquet after the awful grub in the ship. But Chota didn't even look at them. Jealousy gnawed at the boy's heart. He was torn between wishing, with all his being, for this man to make the elephant better, and dreading that once back on his feet the animal would love the healer more than he loved him. Sultan Suleiman's gift Chota might be, yet deep down Jahan saw him as his own. Laden with such shabby thoughts, he was ushered outside. There, another man welcomed Jahan with a wide smile, an Indian by the name of Sangram. He was ecstatic to meet someone who spoke his mother tongue, and moved towards the boy the way a cat inches towards a stove, in need of warmth. Kush Amdeed, Yayab Aapka Rahish Ga Hai. Jahan stared at him deadpan. What's the matter? Can't understand what I'm saying? Asked Sangram, now in Turkish. Our words are different, said Jahan quickly. He told him about the village he came from, so high in the mountains that they slept above the clouds, lodged between the earth and the firmament. He talked about his sisters and his late mother. His voice trembled slightly. Sangram regarded him with a puzzled stare. He seemed about to say something grave. But then, brushing aside whatever had crossed his mind, he sighed and smiled again. All right, let me take you to the shed. Meet the others. As Sangram explained the ways of the Ottomans, they strode down a path that snaked between the garden pavilions and towards a large pond where all kinds of fish splashed around. The boy had a slew of questions regarding life inside the palace, but each time he got a curt whisper by way of an answer. Still, he was able to pick up a few things. Though he had yet either to see or to hear them, he learned that there were lions, panthers, leopards, monkeys, giraffes, hyenas, flathorn stags, foxes, ermines, lynxes, civets, dogs and wildcats, all within reach. Beneath the acacia trees to their right stood the cages of wild animals. The animals it was their responsibility to feed, clean, pacify and keep safe day and night. Recently a rhinoceros had arrived from Habash but had not survived. When not in demand the beasts were sent to other menageries across the city, and their tamers along with them. The larger animals sojourned in the old palace of the Porphyrogenitus, the imperial residence that once hosted the Byzantium nobility, and those born to the purple was now home to the animals of the Sultan. Other creatures were kept in an ancient church near the Hagia Sophia. Chota would have probably been sent to the church, but, because he was still an infant and exceptionally white, it was decided to keep him at the Seraglio for now. Some of the caretakers originated from the four corners of the empire, others from unmapped islands. Those responsible for the birds and fowl dwelled in another lodging, south of the aviary. From dawn to dusk, gazelles, peacocks, roe deer and ostriches roamed in and out of the pavilions. The Sultan's menagerie was a world unto itself. And, while full of ferocious creatures, it was, all in all, really no wilder than the city outside.